if you would take it from there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Ross, Steve, all the folks at OCA, thank you for putting this together. I think this is important. So much is flying around out there. It's very difficult for both service providers and plan sponsors to keep up with the bills and the guidance and what employer plans are and how they might run afoul of compliance issues. So we're going to try today to put all of this in 1 hour into a slightly neater box, something a bit more palatable. Oh, come on. There we go. We're going to talk about the new group health plan requirements in the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. We'll talk about the additional group health plan requirements that are part of the CARES Act that the Senate members have agreed to but have not yet passed. In fact, there's now an apparent snag in the drafting that are causing at least 4 or 5 senators to say they will not pass the bill. I'll get to that here in a minute. And then we're going to walk through a number of other health and welfare related issues, not what's in the bills, but other related issues that you and your clients are facing right now, questions they're asking that arise as a result of actions they are thinking of taking or have taken. And we're going to talk about all that. Here's what we are not going to spend a lot of time on. I am not a labor and employment lawyer. So I will not spend a ton of time on the paid sick leave and paid extended FMLA provisions. I am going to walk through them briefly. I will talk about a couple of benefit plan related issues arising from those, but I'm not going to get into details on those. If you want to submit questions about those, I will try to get them answered time on that. But we will spend the bulk of our time on the health and welfare related provisions. So with all of that, let me get started here. Just a little bit of background. I think we all know what the COVID-19 is. It's important to understand that the coronavirus really is just the virus that causes the common cold. This is a strain of it. And obviously it's spreading rapidly. The 438,749 worldwide cases was accurate as of about 4 hours ago. That has since changed. It's rapidly increasing. And obviously it's a growing problem here in the US. You hear a lot of things out there. Will this end in 2 weeks? Will all the social distancing, the shelter in place, the quarantines, will all that end in just a few weeks? I don't know the answer to that. I think that some of the actions that we're taking now to prevent the spread probably will go on a little longer than a couple of weeks. And I think that's underscored by how quickly this is spreading. So a couple of things I think you and your clients are facing. Workplace safety. There are OSHA rules that are impacting your clients' plans. The employee privacy questions, not just on the HIPAA side, and we will talk about those, but on the ADA and the state law privacy side. Your employees are telling you that they have symptoms or that they have the virus. You're learning that through other avenues. What can you do? What can you say? Those are questions that employers are asking. There are obviously, as I mentioned, new paid leave requirements at the federal level and a few at the state level. We're dealing with temporary layoff and furloughed employees, and we'll talk about how furloughs and layoffs impact continued health coverage, because I think there's a misconception out there about what employers can do, especially when the plan is fully insured. And then we're going to talk, and then obviously the new health benefit plan requirements, and we'll talk about those. But beyond that, even not necessarily what the employer is required to do, but what can they do? What should they do? A lot of things going on out there. So let me real quickly hit on the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, as well as the Extended FMLA Act. These are for employers with less than 500 employees. And I get a lot of questions about that. Why only small employers. It's tied to the tax credit that's associated with the paid leave that's being provided by employers. And the IRS just did not feel like they could absorb a tax credit given for larger employers. And so this is limited to 500 employees. One thing I think is very important for you to understand about this, in addition to it being limited to those under 500, you need to understand that the control group rules that OCA and I and others in our benefits industry have been preaching for many years are really not the driving force here in determining whether a group of related employers have less than 500 employees. It's relevant. Employers in a controlled group, that's relevant analysis, but it's really whether or not you're integrated or not. And you can be in a control group, be a member of a control group, and yet still treated separately from the rest of the group if you're not integrated. You have a different board or you have a different management scheme. Your client should be made aware of that. Most of yours may be under 500 even when you take everybody together, but if you have clients that have subsidiaries that have less than 500, you should alert them to that nuance with respect to that bill. Their employers with less than 50 can be exempted by regulations, and this covers all employees of the employers without regard to the length of employment. Now, this is for the paid sick leave. This is only going to go up to 2 weeks, and it's for paid leave for specified coronavirus-related reasons. You've got, oh, hang on a second. God, did I lose some slides here? Where is my, yep, I sure did. Taking care of someone who's sick with the virus. If your kids are, if you've been quarantined as opposed to like a shelter in place, it's a much broader scope of reasons. The ones that you would obviously think would arise in all of this new coronavirus legislation. And then, of course, there's also the FMLA piece, and for some reason that got left out. I'll send out new slides because I'm sure OCA will want to put that on the website. And there's also a credit, and there's a credit for employers who provide both the paid extended FMLA and the paid sick leave, a tax credit. It's capped at what the paid sick leave would be capped at. But here's what's really important about that. You also can take a credit for the excludable health costs provided that are allocable to the employees receiving the paid leave. So it's not just the paid leave for which an employer gets credit, but it's also the credit for the healthcare costs, the health plan costs that are excludable under the Internal Revenue Code. That's a great thing. Before I move out of that, though, let me say a couple things about health plan and other benefit plan continuation. The question I get is, during these paid sick and FMLA leaves, what, if anything, are we required to do from a benefit standpoint? Remember, this is a much broader FMLA than what you would normally have. There are employees being able to take the leave who haven't been there a year. They only have to have been there 30 days. So it's broader in terms of who can take the leave. It's broader in terms of the scope of leave, but it's FMLA. Let's not be wavering on that. It's FMLA, and FMLA requires that employees taking an FMLA leave of absence are entitled to continue group health coverage on the same terms as before the leave. They can also drop that coverage if they so choose, if they don't want to pay their share of the contributions while they're out. And of course, Code Section 123, more specifically 1.125-3 in the regulations, identifies cafeteria plan permitted payment methods: prepay, pay-as-you-go, or catch-up for those that are continuing that. For those that are just on the 2-week paid sick leave, your leave policies will govern as to what happens during that particular period of time. Your paid leave policies may just say, hey, if you're on a leave, here's what happens with benefits, and that would obviously capture that particular period, this particular period of time. Plus, it's so I don't think a lot's going to happen if that's all that's being taken If it goes beyond that into the FMLA, and some of that will actually overlap, then you're obviously got the FMLA requirements that will apply. A lot of employers are struggling with, well, do we have a layoff? Do we furlough employees? What will that mean for them from a non-benefit standpoint? You may still be entitled to unemployment benefits if you're certainly if you're laid off, you are. It all depends on the state laws actually have partial unemployment benefits. So if I'm forced to work less but still working, I might still qualify for unemployment benefits. So it's important to check with your clients, to check with their labor council, to look at the particular state in which they're in which the employee's in. Well, and we're going to talk a lot about how layoff and furloughs will affect benefits here in just a moment. I've got some sites here that you can go to kind of check on updates on how this is affecting the employer and what they can do. Again, I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this. This part really, I think, from my standpoint, was just to alert you that this exists. There are FAQs. I can provide those to Ross and Steve, and we can put those up on the website that give you a better sense of how these paid leave, both the paid sick leave and the FMLA work, and how that credit will work, and how you allocate health costs to those individuals or for whom you're taking a credit for the paid leave. So that's where we are on that. Let's jump into what we do, the health and welfare benefits. I'm going to start first with the requirements under the bill that passed last week, and then we'll talk about the CARES Act, which is the Senate bill to which mostly agreed. Apparently, they've come to a quote unquote deal, short of the few who are raising issues with some of the language in it. But let's start first with the Families First Coronavirus Response Act that was passed on March 18th. And I want to be clear here, okay? It was effective March 18th. I have seen so many different things out there that these are effective 15 days after the date of enactment. That's when the paid leave provisions are effective. This was effective the date of enactment. And it applies to all group health plans that provide other than accepted benefits. Okay, let's hit the pause button for a second. I want to make sure we're clear on this. It applies to all group health plans that provide other than accepted benefits. If you've got MEC-only plans, if you've got preventive-only plans, which are still out there, believe it or not, fully insured, self-insured, governmental plans, church plans, all group health plans that provide other than accepted benefits are subject to these requirements. What about retiree-only plans? I believe that retiree-only plans are subject to these requirements, and for reasons I won't go into today. There has been some debate about that. It's based on how they drafted this provision, Division F in the Families First Act. But I believe that that a retiree-only plan is subject to these requirements. So it's going to be, in my opinion, all group health plans, fully insured, self-insured, that provide other than accepted benefits, governmental plans, church plans, it doesn't matter. Everybody's subject to this. And here's why: you are required to cover all without cost share. Okay, and that's an important term. Without cost share, all FDA approved products designed to detect the illness, COVID-19 illness, and the virus that causes the illness, which is actually the SARS-CoV-2. That's the virus that actually causes COVID-19 illness. Well, and so all FDA, and that includes the labs that go with that, and all related services or items furnished to covered individuals in an office setting or in a telehealth setting. That means telephone consultation, video consultation, in an urgent care setting and or in an emergency room. If ultimately, in order for the diagnostic testing is provided, and only to the extent of those services relate to the administration of that that diagnostic testing or the implementation of it, and do the evaluation to determine whether you need it or not. A couple of ways that would pop up. I have a telephone consultation, and during the telephone consultation, the doctor says, yep, you need to be tested. Go over here. So I've got the opposite with the telehealth doctor. And then I go and have actual tests done because it's all in vitro in a petri dish. I go have the test done at another place. There's a visit charge for that. That all be covered without cost share. If I go in and the doctor says, yeah, you don't, we're not going to order you a test, then it doesn't have to be covered without cost share. Very specific. And I implore you, if you're working with clients on your communications, let's not be, what's the word I want to use? Let's not be lazy here. Let's be very clear on what exactly is covered. You can undercut this and not give participants a good sense of what is actually covered without cost share. And then you can be overly broad with it and make it seem like more than what is required to be covered is covered. You'll note that treatment is not required to be covered without cost share. Of course, we don't actually have a vaccine or cure for this. Most of the treatment is other than respirators and breathing treatments. If you're not at that stage yet, it's really just fluids and rest. But treatment is not required to be covered without cost share. Can you cover it without cost share? Sure, but you've got insurance policy limitations. We'll talk about those. And very important, there's no distinction made for in and out of network. So it means if I go to an out of network provider, you have to cover it. The question from the First Families Act is, to what extent do I have to cover that without cost share? We think because they use the words cost share and not free, that you can pay up to the allowed amount. Now, this is actually going to get addressed in the CARES Act. When we move to the next slide, you'll see that the Senate bill actually addresses what that amount has to be. Many of you may be disappointed on that. Maybe you won't be. We'll see. But as it stands right now, from March 18th to whenever the Senate bill gets passed, we think the allowed amount is an appropriate interpretation or reasonable interpretation. They come out with guidance later and says you have to build charge and claims can be reprocessed. We think that's reasonable. Obviously, if you're a fully insured plan, then the carrier is going to make that decision. You don't have to make it. Self-funded plan, then obviously, you are have some flexibility on that determination. The CARES Act, which is still again working its way through Congress, actually makes some additions to what's in the Families First Act. So first, they clarify, they not only make very clear that out-of-network payments are included in this, but they clarify the amount the plan has to pay. And it's the hosted provider, it's going to be the price posted on the provider's public website. And provider can be fined for not providing or website. A lot of questions is this going to incent price gouging? I don't think it is for two reasons. Number one, I think Congress's thought here was to shame the providers into putting a reasonable price. Obviously, if you're talking about $2,000 for a diagnostic test here, then you're going to have to post that. Hopefully, folks won't come to you if that's the case. Secondly, I think the government is already starting to take steps to prevent price gouging in this regard. So I think if you're putting $32,000 on your website, you also alert the government that that's happening. So I don't think that it will ultimately lead to price gouging. The CARES Act will expand the list of potential testing, not just FDA approved, but products that FDA approved. They'll have filed an application. I'll just call it emergency application that the government has just identified as an appropriate test, and then adds qualifying coronavirus testing to the recommended services list. So if it's a United States Preventive Services Task Force, ARD recommended, or CDC recommended, non-grandfathered health plans have to cover that. And it has to be covered within 15 days of it being on that list. As you know now, you have the first plan you're beginning on or after 12 months from the date that's on the list. Now it's going to be 15 days. They've also indicated that free or low-cost telehealth for anyone, regardless of the diagnosis, won't disqualify an otherwise eligible employee for HSA participation. There's been a lot of this going around. Right out there. It's a great idea, right? If you're sick, I don't want you to go to the doctor infecting otherwise healthy people at the doctor. And if you're going because you have a rash and not because you have COVID-19, we don't want you going to the doctor and picking that up from someone who's there who does have it. So it's a great idea. We were telling clients we didn't think the risk was very high if you went with that approach, despite the fact that it would technically disqualify an eligible employee from HSA participation. Congress will cure that with the CARES Act. And that will run through December 31, 2021. Let me hit the pause button. I should note that with the exception of the preventive services list, the recommended preventive services list for non-grandfather plans and the low-cost telehealth, all of the other requirements will only run through the national emergency period. We don't know yet how long that will be. And so I think, and we'll talk a little bit about how you communicate this on a temporary change. Carriers may go longer than that. We don't know what they're going to do, but generally speaking, it will only go through the emergency period. This addition to the recommended preventive services list requirement and the telehealth obviously will extend longer. The recommended preventive services will go as long as the health insurance reforms are there. And then the telehealth will go for plan years beginning on or before December 31, 2021. A big change in the CARES Act is the removal of the prescription requirement for over-the-counter drug for health FSAs, HRAs, and HSAs. I know OCA is going to come out more with what that means procedurally and what that means from a reimbursement standpoint, but that will be a huge change. Before I get into other issues, let's talk a little bit about what you need to do to implement these changes.
Hey, Ashley, if I can interrupt you real quick, there are some questions that have come through. Folks, do you have questions? Feel free to type away in the chat, and we'll do our very best to get those through. But Ash, if you would prefer to get those answered at the end of the webinar, just let us know, and we'll direct.
Me yammer on for an hour.
Okay.
Yeah, that's.
All right. I know we had a question from the previous slide that said the problem, I think it was referring to the first bullet point, and correct me if I'm wrong for the individual that wrote it, but the problem on the street is that the carriers are providing arbitrary leniency outside of what the respective DOI has issued. And I believe that was in reference to the first bullet point. Joan, if you don't mind confirming that.
So here's the thing, though. The Department of Insurance came out originally with some mandates in a few states, and those were before this act. So, and they may still do that. I mean, I think there's some that are still going to require some additional things, but the cures, the Families First Act and the CARES Act are mandates that are applicable both to fully insured and self-insured plans. Health insurance carriers will have to do that. Now, obviously, state commissioners can expand on that, and they may very well. I had a list from yesterday that I don't have with me that had a list of some of the differences in some of the states. But that's going to be the carrier's issue. And they're the ones financing and funding, guaranteeing the benefit once you pay premium. So the bigger concern has been for self-funded plans that have some flexibility. How far do they go, and do they have stop loss? That's always an issue. And actually, I'd like to talk about that. So, but right. These are mandates that are across the board, and I agree. Some state department DOIs may actually go further. If they do, that'll apply to carriers, and they'll have to comply.
As a follow-up to that, do you see there being any risk of listening to the carrier when outside the DOI has different guidance?
So this has always been an issue. And I haven't got to this yet, but the CARES Act and the Families First Act are both enforced as though these were in the health insurance provisions of ERISA, the Code, and Public Health Service Act. So here's what that means. It means that an employer with more than 50 employees can technically still be subject to an excise tax under Section 490B for a failure in the insurance policy. And so I think there is some concern that a carrier doesn't implement what is at least required by federal law. To the extent the states go further and require carriers to cover more, then that doesn't raise any concern, obviously, from a federal law standpoint. The minimum structure will be what we just talked about. And whether DOI does more than that, I don't know, but we'll see how that turns out. But employers, I think, still have some stake in this and need to check with carriers to make sure they are, in fact, implementing this. But we've always had that problem, right? You hope that the scope of preventive treatment services covered by the insurance carrier is adequate. Now, there is some exception, and therefore, problems caused solely by carrier action. But I think here you've got some stake in the game as an employer if you have more than 50 employees. So I hope that answers the question.
Right.
Was that it?
For now, I think what we'll do is we'll address most of them at the end as we go along.
So let's talk about, how do you communicate these changes to employees? You know, we talk and preach all the time at OCA and at Olson Bird, and formal amendments are necessary, and you need to issue a summary of material modifications, and If you have SBC, summary of benefits and coverage, and the change impacts those, and you need to reissue those. I'm not actually advocating for that necessarily, at least not in the way that we normally would. Now, again, if you're fully insured, your carrier is going to take care of it in the policy, or should be. They actually may not be distributing all employees what it is they're doing. Maybe on you. We'll have to check with the carrier on that. But here's the really important part. I don't think that you need to go to the nth degree like we would normally suggest. What I'm telling my clients is do a resolution that wraps around whatever the communication is that's being sent out to employees. If the communication sort of cuts short what the requirements are, I think in your resolution or amendment you can add to that or refer to these acts and say you'll comply with those acts. And I'm actually putting at the bottom of communications, hey, this is intended to be an SMM. Keep this with your SPD. We're also treating this as a modification to your summary of benefits and coverage. Keep this with your SPD. I'm actually changing the terms of my SPDs and my SBCs. Remember, except for the Medicare and mandate and the telehealth, if you're doing telehealth, and that's really just a procedural law, these changes are temporary. They'll go away. And I'm not keen on having to go in and amend SPDs through an SMM, distribute that, redistribute SBCs, and then do it all over again when those changes expire, because it will. So I'm okay with sort of this Band-Aid approach for this purpose if you want to go that route. Now, let's talk about the other issues that are coming up. We got a series of these that are coming up. We're going to get into cafeteria plan requirements and code. We're going to talk about all the fun stuff that's happening above and beyond these requirements. So again, treatment without cost sharing is not required by the Families First Sectors Act, but certainly you can, if you're a self-funded plan with stop loss, if you do anything other than what's required by law, then you really need to check with the stop loss carrier. I have had clients that are self-funded with stop loss where the stop loss carrier pushed back on additional amount, and I've even had to say, even where it's required by law, we want to see it in the plan. So check with your stop loss carrier. If you're an insured plan, fully insured plan, you don't have a lot of flexibility over what can be provided. The carrier will make that determination. And I think it goes back to Joan's question or comment. It's possible that the Department of Insurance will require more. And if they're requiring less and carriers aren't compliant with the federal law, then I think employers need to raise objections. But generally, you're not going to have much flexibility there. I'm not seeing insurers covering treatment without cost share largely. So again, I don't know that we'll see that. Self-funded plans certainly have debated that. I have a couple of clients that are paying for treatment without cost share. There's a high deductible health plan technical issue there, because if you're covering treatment, frankly, all of this stuff that we've been talking about, even that which is required by the two acts, those aren't preventive care. Those are diagnostic tests for someone who has symptoms. And at that point, it's no longer preventive. And so if you cover that below the deductible of a higher deductible health plan, then you are technically disqualifying the employee from HSA eligibility. There'll be a requirement of federal law to do that with respect to testing. That was also approved by the IRS in Notice 2020-15. They said, look, testing you can cover without cost share below the deductible. That won't cause employees to lose eligibility from HSA, and will let plans that do have to do that and do it and don't are concerned about disqualifying employees from disability. Rest are okay. So we'll see how all this pans out. I think this next one is going to be the one that is probably one that you'll have more say-so in as a service provider, especially for a service provider of fully insured plans. So there's obviously a lot going on, a lot of proposed furloughs, proposed layoffs, reduction in hours. And so we're saying we have to take these steps, survive it, so we don't put our employees in harm's way. So we're going to furlough these employees here, but we're going to give them or let them continue active light coverage. Folks, that's problematic. As it is, it's problematic for fully insured plans and self-funded plans with stop loss. Furloughed employees would not otherwise be eligible for continued coverage after election. Carriers would actually be justified in denying benefit for those individuals as ineligible for that coverage. Shifting that liability then back over to you on a self-funded basis or your client on a self-funded basis. So we have advised all of our clients who are either have fully insured plans, and we do still have a few that do, and that are self-funded with stop loss, to reach out to their carriers and say, this is what we want to do. These folks are not eligible under the policy and under the plan, but we want to continue that coverage. I've also heard, well, gee, it's just a leave of absence, right? We don't, if our policy says, hey, you can continue folks during a leave of absence, and a lot of policies will say something along the lines of, hey, even if you're not an eligible employee because you're on leave of absence, we'll let you continue coverage, but only up to a specified amount of time. That's all I have weeks at 10 months. This furlough and layoff are not necessarily leaves of absence. They look and feel a lot like a leave of absence, but they're kind of something different. And what's interesting about this is, from a legal perspective, there really is no definition of furlough or layoff, and there's no legal distinction between the two. People treat them somewhat differently. Furlough, they tend to keep you on the payroll, if you will. Have to actually terminate your employment. Layoff, your employment is often terminated. Really, for both, as we talked about earlier, both can actually trigger unemployment compensation in a lot of at least certainly in some areas, furlough can. So there's a lot of uncertainty around the status of these employees. Yeah. Somebody, I thought somebody said that. Okay. So there's a lot of uncertainty.
Well, actually, real quick on this subject, if you could just address, because in New York, a lot of the carriers are honoring that, and that they would not, deny any benefits if they are furloughed or.
And if that's a mandate of the Department of Insurance, great. Then you don't need to reach out to the carrier. If it isn't, I think you still need to reach out to the carrier. I have yet to have see a carrier push back on that. But you don't want to be in the position where you've taken some action thinking that the carrier will be benevolent and be okay with that. Let there be 3 or 4 cancer claims among that furloughed group, and let's see how that works out if you haven't gotten approval in advance. So I think you've got to reach out to the carrier. But this goes even beyond the health benefits world. Let's talk about life insurance and disability. A lot of employers are saying, look, we want to keep them in active-like status, but hey, they may not be eligible during a furlough for that. And so I think you're going to have to reach out, because you don't want to be in a position where you tell folks, yes, your life insurance remains effective, don't need to convert that, or you'll be eligible for short or long-term disability from the carrier, when in fact they may not be. That then shift liability back over to the employer on a self-funded basis. I have actually, and I'm actually defending and have defended in the last couple of years employers who have sent over eligibility files with individuals on it that didn't meet the eligibility requirements, and they did have catastrophic claims. The carrier not only rejected the claim by the individual, but then claimed fraud on the part of the employer and tried to rescind the policy. So I don't think the carriers will push back if you're trying to do things to help your employees. And in many states, it may become a mandate that carrier do allow. I know I saw what I think New Jersey, Pennsylvania, I think several notices, rulings from the insurance commissioner where relief is being provided, even premium relief in many instances, and so that's good. You got to keep up with that. I'm talking generally here, but if no such guidance has been issued and the carrier is not under some sort of mandate, that you got to reach out.
Actually, if I can add just 2 quick items on this. Number 1, as a follow-up, when you reach out, folks, get it in writing.
Yes.
As an answer. So yeah. Number 2, what is key partners member's health plan as in writing currently in the SPD. The fact that someone who's furloughed can be kept on the health plan as an active employee. We'll put that as a post. I'm sure we can get a copy of it, and we'll put that on our website at some point within the year.
And that's very interesting, Steve, because if you, like, in my experience, I've been doing this a long time, when I look at a lot of insurance policies, what they'll say is they'll actually exclude layoffs. Like I'm dealing with this for a huge hotel thing right now where the policy excludes individuals on a layoff. Well, then you're really in a conundrum, because, as I said, there's not a big or a clear legal distinction between furlough and layoff. Is the carrier going to consider this layoff, despite the fact you call it a furlough? I don't know the answer to that. So you do have to check. You guys have a much better feel for the New Jersey policies and the New Jersey insurance laws than I do. I only deal with them as they come in for you and for the few clients that I have in New Jersey that are fully insured. They're not very many. I know they have issues that have some guidance, but not all staff. So I have to go back and look in New Jersey to see how broad it is and what it will allow. For example, I have not analyzed whether or not you can continue coverage during a furlough without a COBRA election. Maybe there's some premium relief. I don't know. But you have to be very careful on that. The point on this is, don't assume that if they're not otherwise eligible, the term plan carrier will honor your offer of coverage. Be sure to get something from them in writing. And even, frankly, subsidizing COBRA can be a problem. And it's funny, we had some internal calls at OCA where we discussed why this is. It doesn't make sense to many that this would create issues, but it's increasing the number of covered, a larger pool. But it is. I'm defending a stop loss claim right now where the employer subsidized an individual's coverage. There was no COBRA. We're going to treat it as COBRA, but there was no COBRA election, subsidized coverage, and the stop loss carrier is pointing to the policy, which points to the plan, where the plan says you have to elect and pay 102% premium. Is a reason for them not to pay. So be very careful when dealing with insurance policies and exceptions. Not always obligated to honor your particular exception. 125 issues. I think this is where we're getting a lot of questions. And look, these rules are complicated on a normal day. They just exacerbated with COVID-19. And let's walk through where we are on things. And I'm going to kind of give you my view of the landscape here. and how you and your employer client, or you as an employer, should proceed. First, grace period for health FSAs has not been extended, right? That ended for most calendar year plans a week ago. 15th day of the third month, that ended, has not been extended. Do I think that IRS may extend that? Perhaps. They're considering a lot of stuff, and this has been presented to them. As of right now, they have not extended it. Am I okay with you extending that? We'll talk about that here in a minute. Employers may, however, expand or open up a new runout period. IRS rules do not prescribe a runout period at all. They simply say you can have one, but it needs a reasonable period of time. So I have no issue from a legal standpoint. If it hasn't ended yet, so let's say you go through March 31st, you can amend the plan to extend that longer for likely a long period to submit prior year expenses. And it's ended already. You can open up a new one as far as I'm concerned. And I know OCA plans to provide some assistance in this area. And Steve and Ross, you guys can talk about that here in a minute. But we're going to facilitate your efforts if that's what you want to do. Carryover maximum has not been increased, and I really don't expect it to be. The election change rules still apply technically. Now, what's interesting about this is we have forgotten, I think, over the years how loosely they're applied to like dependent care elections. So let me walk you through these. I know we've got an FAQ that was, I think it was posted on the OCA website where we kind of do this in table form, but we're going to talk about it here. So if I take an unpaid leave of absence, I should be able to revoke my election of coverage, even if I'm able under plan to continue coverage. And here's why. That's a change in status event. That's a change in employment status. Well, as we all know, changes in employment status don't allow election changes unless they have an effect on eligibility under an employer plan. The IRS has said employer plan means the underlying benefit plan or the cafeteria plan. Well, folks, if you're not receiving compensation, you've lost eligibility under the cafeteria plan. For those who don't get paid, there is no salary reduction to be made. So I think an interpretation of those rules that we have always taken is that even if I can continue coverage, I'll be on an after-tax basis for, let's say, the health plan. If I'm on unpaid leave of absence, I should be able to revoke that coverage even though I haven't lost eligibility for the benefit plan. Dependent care participants might be eligible for reimbursements during an unpaid leave generally. And so regardless of how you file this rule, that allows election change because that affects the tax, the eligibility tax reimbursement. Decap elections. You're going to see a lot of situations where there are coverage changes related to daycare. So a lot of work from home policies, right? We're subject to that guys under shutdown. When I choose to go from home, no longer need the daycare. I can bring my kids home. Or if I'm not working, leaving my kids in daycare, but I don't need the daycare to work. So I could then revoke my election in that particular instance. If my daycare closes, and that means business wherever you are, where your finances, my daycare closes, I'll be able to coverage. What if I decide to change from my closed daycare to another daycare or another provider? I hire the baby sitter down the street to get more than I need to worry about. I could do some to account for that or increase the cost of more. That I get if I'm working from home. The daycare closed. But I need to hire a babysitter in order to work. I think for many of you, if you're working home with kids, this is your first time to do that, you will appreciate this discussion. Right? Is that an expense that enables you to work? I believe it is. I believe that it is. And especially in this time where flexibility is paramount, I think that's probably okay. What if I have unused funds when I revoke my election? Can I then use them when I get back at the same plan? I think I can. We do that all the time for returning from FMLA or leaves of absence. Can I just continue that, use those unused funds and not make an election when I return? I think you can on that as well because there's actually a rule in the cafeteria plan rules that allows you, an employer to adopt a plan or amend your plan to allow former employees to access unused funds for daycare expenses after termination. Analytically, this really is no different. So if I had several $1,000s of unused funds where with the dependent care account, come back and I might not want to make it. I might use it there. I can and then what about health FSA elections? Well, that's going to be a little more limited. So you've got all these coverage changes that are being made to Family First Act and the CARES Act. Well, will those allow changes to your health FSA? Well, I'm getting free testing. Or now I'm going to get free telehealth because that's now permitted. Can I change my health FSA because I no longer need that? The answer to that right now is no. That's a coverage change, and those don't apply to health FSA. What if I work from home? What if I had a procedure that was canceled? The answer to those are no. Certainly, if I've been put on furlough or I'm on a leave of absence, and that's caused me to lose eligibility either for the health FSA or I no longer have pay, yes, then that allows an election change. And as of right now, there's no relief from those. So that should give you a good sense of what you can do. And the chart that we've done in the FAQs will give you an even better sense. What about mid-year open enrollments? A lot of employers are looking to do a special enrollment without changing their plan year. A lot of carriers are doing that. I think in some instances it may be a requirement, but it's not. I know they're offering that up anyway. Can you do that under 125? The answer to that is no. I make election already during the year to not elect coverage. Well, then I've made an election, right? I love the old Rush song. Even though you do not choose, you still have made a choice, right? So I chose not to participate. Well, I did. I made a choice. I'm not participating. That was my election. And this may or may not allow you to get back in. Now, I will say I have heard some make the argument that those that didn't enroll, that this is a coverage increase. that would allow those not enrolled to now enroll. I don't know about that. That's a close call. But here's the deal, guys. I think right now, IRS enforcement is probably non-existent. I don't see the IRS swooping in to enforce the rules against an employer who, in good faith, has taken steps to ensure the well-being of its employees. So if you're opening enrollment to let people come in that previously chose not to elect, does that violate Section 125? Yeah, it does. So there's some risk there. Do I think that the risk is low? Yeah, I do think it's really low. So I'm not losing any sleep over my clients who are doing this, and they are. What I do tell them, though, is, hey, look, I mean, technically it's a violation. So you are assuming something is low. I don't feel like the enforcement here. And we may even get guidance down the road. But as of right now, you're taking on some risk. I think it's low. I've gotten a lot of questions about commuter elections, parking and transit. So what's interesting about transportation fringe benefit plans is that they don't operate like health FSAs. They're not plan year with you lose. They're really payroll to payroll period. And amounts unused can carry over from and I can change my election at any time for any reason on a prospect. So those that have been forced to work from home and no longer need parking, for example, they can revoke their election so that they're not accruing any dollars. And unused funds will be waiting on them. And at some point they can make that election for them. All this is very well documented in the Index 132-9. What about transit passes? That provides a bit more of a conundrum, right? I've been issued passport mark and only for mark. Now I'm working from home and I don't need anymore what to do. Well, I think the only, at least the first step is for the employee to go back to emergency refund. They may be able to. And I know Steve and Ross, the folks at OCA are monitoring that. Can the employer give a refund in cash for that? Under the rules, no. And is that kind of action beyond my comfort zone? Yes. It's hard for me to sometimes say why I'm uncomfortable about one thing and not, say, for example, mid-year open enrollment. I'm uncomfortable about giving cash back to people where it's not permitted. I'm less concerned about allowing pre-tax salary reductions, even though they're very similar. Money is fungible, but I'm uncomfortable about it. This is probably going to be a period of limited enforcement. They decide what to do on the risk. This is the issue. This next one, Section 139, disaster relief. By the way, I'm going to pass a lot staff and pipe. Sorry about that. This is important stuff. So you'll see out there right now, or maybe you haven't, you will if you haven't already, about Section 139 qualified disaster relief payments. So there is a code section that allows employers to provide payments or reimbursements to employees on tax basis unstated for living, personal, funeral expenses, those types of expenses when there has been a national disaster declared. Now, OCA is going to, well, I'll get to that. So actually, this really is, it's been planned. It's been planned. It's not one of those where you kind of do that loosely. And in the event that there's a national disaster, then you can actually pay for like daycare outside of the 129 context for transportation, utilities, just personal family living expenses, some medical. Now, this can't be just flat wages. It's not a wage replacement. They still have to be taxed. But when you're talking about childcare, transportation, it doesn't include, like non-essential or luxury items, but essential items. Those can be paid for or reimbursed tax-free by the employer without substantiation pursuant to that plan. Now, the big question is the current national emergency a qualified disaster? The president has not issued or declared a disaster. He declared a national emergency under the Stafford Act, where you also can declare a disaster. And we think that it's likely that the IRS believes the national emergency declaration is tantamount to a qualified disaster under Section 139. Here's why. Way back in 2003, again, that revenue ruling, IRS sort of just haphazardly says, in defining a qualified disaster under Section 165, which is 139, bases its eligibility triggered by a disaster. 165 says disaster, declared disaster, or national emergency on disaster. That's the only time that's mentioned. In that revenue ruling, it deals nothing with disaster declaration. So hard to know exactly what that means. But the Notice 2020-18 that we're going to talk about here in just a minute, that extended the due date for individual tax return, it relies on Code Section 7508 Cap A. 7508 Cap A also is triggered by the same disaster declaration in 165. So if the IRS must believe or feel that it is a disaster, called that, they would not have been able to use 7508 to suspend or postpone the filing deadline. We have told clients, look, we think the IRS is going to come out and say, yes, it is. We would prefer to wait until then. Some or not. You need to talk, or your clients need to talk with their tax counsel. So there's some evidence to support it feel that way. And so we have a program that will facilitate that. We'll have a plan. You can put caps on it, even though you're not required to. Excuse me. You can limit the scope of personal family and living expenses. That's what we that's you have to do that. Excuse me. Let's talk about privacy and then we'll call it an answer. So a lot of questions about how does all of this and all things that we are going to do. Well, let's start with this. We have to make sure that the information about someone's diagnosis is going to come in through one of two channels. It's going to come in through the employment channel. I tell my supervisor that I have symptoms or that I've been diagnosed with COVID-19, and supervisor then tells the employer that's not PHI. That did not come in through the health plan or the health plan function. It's through an employment. It's not PHI. Is it subject to confidentiality rules? Yes, you cannot just go hog wild with that. State laws will apply because it's probably personally identifiable information. It's not PHI. Calls for employees to self-report. A lot of employers that are doing that, and not HIPAA, not PHI employer. But it could come in through the health plan. I actually had clients, the plan sponsor firewall personnel reach out to the claims administrators, insurance carrier, and ask for identification of those who have been identified as having COVID-19. Why would they do that? Well, in some cases, at least at that time, they were wanting to make plan design changes for those individuals. They were going to waive cost share for treatments. Some may still do that even because it's not required, and so they want to know who that is. Of course, you could just tell the claims administrator that that's what you want to do. Instead of having their name, that's what's happening. So that could come up. It could come in where I call in and talk to the plan sponsor, firewall people, the people in charge of the for help with a claim. Hey, I'm having trouble explaining. Can you help me? That's probably coming into the health channel, and that would be subject to HIPAA. Where we run into problems is that a lot of employees, especially for your employer clients, the employees wear two hats. Are HR employer function, HR employer function, and they also are within the firewall. And in that section, I know the channel which the information coming in and put on the right hat so that you do the right thing. If your client is fully insured and you're dealing with a fully insured medical plan, it's probably not an issue. A, you're not going to get any information from the carrier, detailed information. B, unless you've amended your plan, you're probably a hands-off plan sponsor. You're not all from, 2003 when we did at OCA, we did that. How long I've been around. We did the HIPAA privacy in a box. We talked about hands-off employers with fully insured plans. In that case, there is no firewall. If someone comes to you and says, I need help with a plan, that's not a channel. That's just you. Got to be mindful of all this and know that, hey, it may be subject to HIPAA. If it is subject to HIPAA, your uses and disclosures of it are very limited. I won't go into those, except to say there is one exception where you could use it for employment under serious and imminent threat of harm. If you knew, if you had PHI that said, hey, Ashley has COVID-19, he's coming to work, we not only need to tell Ashley to go home, but we need to tell the supervisor so that action can be taken to disinfect and to get people away from there. That probably fits in the serious and imminent threat of harm. Cautious and careful when considering using that as a tool to disclose PHI. And last, you're sending people home. So if you're a business associate subject to HIPAA or your firewall personnel, you're sending people home, and they will come into contact with you. Just absolutely important to have a work from home policy. We at OCA do look at the site. It's common sense stuff, and it really ought to be part of. If you have employees who work from home now, you ought to already have this. Things like don't print anything that has PHI on it. What you absolutely have to. I don't even know when that would be. If you do print, shred it. And I would encourage employers where this is the case to buy their home employees. Don't access PHI with family around. Right? Don't be sitting at the kitchen table with your spouse, significant other, where they can see the screen and you're processing a health FSA claim. Just don't do that. You need to have an area away from everybody else where you work. Don't leave PHI unattended either on a screen, or if you printed it and haven't shredded it yet, don't leave it unattended. Cell phones. A lot of call centers have been shut down. Folks are actually using cell phones. I have a problem with you calling on a cell phone where PHI will be disclosed. I do have a problem with it being left on a voicemail. And so what I'm telling folks is, hey, your voicemail message, I would say, don't leave me a voicemail message and tell information on it, or just don't leave me a voicemail message, to warn them not to do that. So with that, Ross, I will stop and we can go to
Ross, are there other questions we want to cover that come in?
There's a question, so if you want to bring up the section 139 code and address that subject, then we can go from there.
I'm just going to do that and close. So, let me just say my goodbyes now, and then I'll have a most importantly, thank you big time to our friend Ashley. Folks, as you know, there's a lot of information that's out there on the internet. Not all of it is accurate by any means, and one thing we've always prided ourselves on is being able to provide accurate resources, and that mainly comes from Mr. Gillihan. So thank you again for making yourself available to the conversation. Folks, is actually talking about Section 139, and this is extremely fluid, and it's not a surprise that OCA was even aware of yesterday. This morning, Ross and I made the decision that the next 3 months, once it's official that it's going to be available, OCA will offer to its clients that have any line of service the 139 program for free, and we're going to go one step further because our mission is to help people, period. We'll offer the service to anyone, any group, any employer that you feel could benefit from it at no cost the next 3 months. So we can be of assistance, reach out to account executives. This is so fluid that the account executives at OCA will know about it as of this second. So give us the evening to communicate with them, and starting tomorrow we should have some information and application available for you for that. Also, Ashley talked earlier about there's no federal regulation to the extent of what we're going to use for the run-out period for whether for fees already. We got to say, OCA made a decision a little over a week ago to last additional fees to amend plans to extend waiting periods during this time. I would strongly urge anybody to visit our website on our abilities to know that literally has been the hiccup we've had since we've done mobile. So with that, again, I want to thank everybody that's been on this call, for your patience, for your commitment, for your advice, and for your commitment to allow us to be any assistance we can on the shop.
Thank you. Just to get in a little bit more detail regarding the 139 plan from a operation perspective or employee usage, the way this program would work, if the employer chooses to go down this route and offer it, employees will be receiving a debit card, and that debit card would work at emergency providers, as Ashley mentioned before, that are tied to help support the employee because of the circumstances that they're in. So whether that be for utilities, for their cable or internet, or for daycare expenses that they might incur. Our debit card would be able to be used to pay for those expenses, and given the rules of Section 139, there would not be any substantiation required. So ultimately, at the end of the day, the employee can swipe the card to pay their internet provider or their daycare provider, and the transaction will be approved by them, submit documentation to validate the transaction. So it's going to be a very easy interaction benefit that the employee could use if the employer so chooses to go down this route. So a lot more to come out, but we are trying to expedite the program as quickly as possible and make it available to our clients ASAP. So with that being said, there were again a couple of questions that did come through. One of which was regarding FSA, Ashley, and dependent care elections, and what happens to those elections if an employee is laid off and then decides, for whatever reason, not to return to that company. What happens to those unused funds that were remaining in their FSA account or dependent care account?
Well, I think if you're laid off, I mean, the first point in the analysis is, well, what is my eligibility during this period of time? So if I'm laid off, it's likely I'm no longer eligible for the health FSA. And if I'm no longer eligible, my salary reduction automatically ceases. I don't need you to call in and look at election. It's going to end when the coverage ends. And of course, the coverage ends for a health FSA. We all know that's subject to use or lose. And the unused funds could only be used for expenses incurred before the layoff. If the employer wants to amend its plan or not amend the plan, but allow the employee to continue health coverage during a layoff or a furlough, I think they can do that. I would recommend amending the plan if you can do that as soon as possible. If not before, that would obviously be preferable, but if not before, as soon as the furlough or layoff begins. But I think you could do that provided that they actually contributed. The thing that's interesting about health FSAs is that contributions are sort of a necessary element of the risk shifting element that has to be a part of the health FSA. And so you could say, well, you're out, but we'll let you continue it, just pay your share. And don't forget too, if they are losing eligibility as a result of this, they have COBRA. They might have COBRA. They might not. COBRA is obviously an option. So, I mean, I think you've got some flexibility that we've always had. There's nothing new about that or unique about the COVID-19 pandemic. I do think that if you do lose eligibility and you do have funds, you don't like COBRA, you're not eligible for COBRA, the funds are lost. Just like they would be at any other time. For dependent care, you could actually amend your plan to allow employees to spend down the unused dependent care amount during periods that they're currently terminated employment or they're not eligible. And I mentioned that earlier. A lot of employers don't do that, but you can. It actually is permitted, and that's because there's no risk shifting requirement for dependent care. That's also why you can only be reimbursed up to balance in your account and not your full annual election. So if you go on and frankly, if you go on a furlough or a layoff, you're not really going to be eligible for reimbursements during that period of time anyway. And frankly, most of my clients don't treat you as eligible for a dependent care during an unpaid leave or a furlough. And so you'd lose eligibility on the dependent care, whether you liked it or not, in most cases. But where you didn't, where you were allowed to continue coverage, even though you couldn't submit reimbursement, the employee would be able to revoke that election as a result of that furlough. And those funds, as I said earlier, can just sit there and wait for you to return if you return in the plan year. I actually have addressed almost all of these situations in the chart that's on the FAQs. I think, Ross, you've probably posted. I walk through these for health FSA and dependent care FSA. I think that'll provide more clarity around that. I encourage you to check that.
Sure. Great. And just to extend Ashley's comment regarding the dependent care and the spend down, OCA by default does not allow that, but our systems can accommodate that. So if you're an employer that needs to terminate the employee, given the circumstances, we can set up their account so that there is a spend down feature for them to utilize their dependent care funds for the remainder of the current plan year, and still be able to access those funds for, daycare expenses that they had planned for this summer while their kids were home from school, as an example.
And
Right.
we'll imply that we will waive the amendment fee as well for these circumstances.
Next question, just switching over to the COBRA subject, Ashley, which seems to be the biggest question that most of our clients are having. In general, can the employer subsidize the COBRA premium if the employee formally elects COBRA?
So as I noted in that slide, I mean, you can. There's nothing in federal law that prohibits that. That's certainly permissible from a federal COBRA standpoint, and probably from state law standpoint as well. But here's the thing. I have run into situations in my 24, almost 25 years of doing this, where the carrier has pushed back on that. And I realize that seems silly. They made the election, but where the plan says you get this coverage only if you make the election and pay 102% of the cost, and they're not paying 102% of the cost, that makes them technically ineligible. And that would actually give the carrier some justification to reject those claims. Do they usually do that? No. But I have always advised clients, and they want to subsidize COBRA and it's a fully insured plan, and make sure they clear it with the carrier before they do that where it's not required. I mean, I know the Council of Affordable Healthcare has sort of lobbied the agencies to and Congress to issue an ARA-like subsidy again during this period of time. And I'm not hearing anything on that, certainly not included in the CARES Act or the Families First Act. That could gain some traction, and it's up to no issue. Where it's not required by law, and the plan says you get this covered only if you elect and pay 102% of the premium, it can create issues. Realize that might seem silly, but it can.
Next question is, if the state mandates, which in the Northeast is more common than in other parts of the country, but if the state mandates a work from home policy and my job doesn't allow my job functions from home, I am not sick or obviously tied or sick with COVID-19, am I still eligible for the paid leave?
I'm not going to answer any of those questions because not because I'm being obstinate, but because there is a whole debate going on right now around work from home, voluntary social distancing, shelter in place, and mandated quarantine. And so I'm not really in a position to answer that. It's a great question. I'm happy to run it by my people, if my labor people. We have a task force of about 100 lawyers that are dealing with various aspects of this. And that is not one of the aspects that I'm dealing with on a regular basis just because of bandwidth. We have labor lawyers that do. I'm happy to get that question to or update you through OCA. That is a great question, a relevant question, but I'm just not going to attempt to answer it.
Thank you. Folks, we'll work with Ashley in getting that addressed. Next question we had is tied going back to the Section 139, in that, is this used in place of wages or in addition to?
No, it cannot.
For example,
it cannot be a wage substitute. Let me just kill that right now. It is a now. It can't technically be a wage substitute. I can't say I'm going to, we'll pay your wages. We're going to use it as paid leave and have no taxes. It doesn't work that way. It ends up being like a wage replacement in a sense. It's fungible, right? So I'm going to reimburse you for expenses that you've incurred, but in reality, I'm not having to substantiate that. So it is kind of like that, but it can't be set up as a wage replacement.
As a follow-up to that, if you get an SBA loan or there's a disaster relief loan with tax credits to the employer, would that be able to be used to apply to funding this program?
For a 139 program?
Correct.
So the employer gets a loan? I'm not following the question. Sorry.
I guess if the employer takes out utilizing the small business loan that's available can they use those funds and apply it to this program?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I don't know the answer to that because I don't know what the restrictions are for a small business loan. That's another great question, but I don't know. 139 is there's not much guidance around it. All we know is that the employer can make payments, what they call qualified disaster relief payments out on a tax-free basis. They don't give us a whole lot of guidance on the types of expenses other than to say, personal living, family, funeral expenses, throw funeral expenses in. And they don't give us a lot of guidance on, exactly how the program has to be set up, other than we have to have a written plan document. If you're going to cap payments, you need to cap them in the written plan document. I'm going to limit scope of payments. You need to do that in the plan document. But beyond that, we just don't know a whole lot. So leave sharing, that's another one that usually falls under a 139 program. Well, so.
Thank you. Those are the questions that have come in so far. Again, folks, just as a reminder, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar as well as Ashley's PowerPoint. So you will have that available to you by the end of the day or tomorrow morning at the latest.
Yeah, and actually, I'll get those
Ashley,
additional slides for the other leave provisions. I don't know what happened. I cut too much out, I guess. I'll get those in there and you can put the full thing online.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, for
thank you all very much.
once again putting up with me.
Most importantly, everybody, please stay safe.
Yes.
Yes.
Don't shake hands. Don't hug. Stay away from people.
All the best, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks.
Bye-bye.